You're listening to Building the Broncos with Nick Kendall and Carl Dumler, Broncos Country's leading draft and scouting analysts. Get on over to milehighhuddle.com to sound off on all things Broncos.
Hello there, Broncos Country, and it is once again time for another episode of Building the Broncos. I am your host, Carl Dumler, and joining me today, I hinted at this on our last episode because my boy Nick is off getting himself married in the mountains. Hopefully not covered in snow, as I heard they got about 9 inches. But we got a special guest today, and I'm very excited. This guy, I love him to death, love his work. I would encourage everybody to go read every article this man writes. So very, very happy to have him on here. But we got our own Mile High Report, Jeff Essary, on here today. And very, very excited. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, Carl. How are you, man? Thank you so much for having me on. I'm honored. Love you guys' work as well, and happy to jump in and fill Nick's shoes while he's off getting married.
Well, that's great, man. Just like I said, just happy to have you on. Get to talk some football, some Broncos football. I wish it was a little happier time to be talking Broncos football, but that doesn't mean that there aren't still some great things to be able to talk about and just kind of dig into this team. And I'm excited just to hear some of your thoughts on where this team's at and where they're going. So we'll get right into that. But I want to make sure everybody knows where they can find us all on Twitter. You can find me at Carl Dumler MHH. And, of course, Nick, even though he's going to be off the grid here for a couple days, you can find him at Nick Kendall MHH. And, of course, Jeff at Jeffrey Essary. That's ESSARY for anybody wondering. I would highly recommend following him on Twitter. You can also follow the podcast Twitter account at BTB Football Pod, and make sure you subscribe to our show and leave us a rating as we value your input. You can find the show on iTunes, Stitcher, and even that of YouTube. Also, make sure you head on over to milehighhuddle.com, a new affiliate of the Maven Coalition and Sports Illustrated. Also know that this podcast is powered by Overtime Media.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
All right, like I said, very, very excited to dig into this. Now Jeff and I, if people don't remember, it was kind of a random meeting, I guess. We got to meet at the Senior Bowl a couple years ago with all the big quarterbacks down there of Mayfield and Allen, and you, me, and Sarah, kind of just all of us from our three big websites got to have this opportunity to hang out for a week. And honestly, it's one of my favorite experiences in football. I still have very, very fond memories of that. I have my little media pass hanging up in my room, and every once in a while I look at that and just remember our times down there.
Oh, yeah, it was a blast. And like you said, a once-in-a-lifetime experience. I actually was just wearing my Senior Bowl pullover hoodie thing yesterday. And somebody at work was asking me about that. And I was like, let me tell you all about this. This was this great, amazing experience that I had. It was awesome. And I'm going to try to go back next year, and it'd be great to, meet up there again and hang out. But yeah, like you said, it was just kind of a random occurrence. I mean, I'd followed Sarah on Twitter, and then I forget if we followed each other previously on Twitter before, but to just kind of, the Twitter Broncos community from all over come together in, Mobile, Alabama, of all places, and just hang out for a week. And it was a perfect week for, because the Denver coaching staff was there. And so a ton of Denver media converged on Mobile, and obviously Denver had a high pick in that draft, and that was the Baker Mayfield draft and stuff. And so, man, it was just an incredible experience. And I'm an Oklahoma fan as well from college football, so getting to see Baker Mayfield and talk to Broncos coaches and just bump elbows with the who's who of the NFL throughout that week was just really cool, and just an awesome experience. And we had a blast just hanging out together and getting to it just reminded me of that there's people behind those user accounts on Twitter, and it's a relationship game, and so you make friends and stay that way for the next several years. And so here we are.
That's right. Here we are. And so I'm excited to hear some of your thoughts here on this team. I mean, it's kind of crazy. Like, yes, they were down a couple years ago, but I think we all kind of thought they'd be up by now. And here we are, possibly looking at another top 5, top 10 pick in the upcoming draft if things don't turn around pretty quick. New coaching staff, just a lot of new going on. And so I wanted to get your opinion on this, just kind of put on your GM hat, because that's kind of what we do here at the Building the Broncos, is where we like to be those armchair GMs. We like to say that we know better than Elway sometimes, but that's probably not true. But, still, there's been a lot of interesting decisions that have been made. And so where do you see the Broncos at in reality of right now with this team, with this roster, with this coaching staff? I mean, are they trending in the right direction? Are they still just one of those really bad teams that needs to get a lot figured out? Is it because of the youth on the team? Because I think once Sanders left, the average age is like 25 years old?
Yeah.
3 years of being on a roster?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I guess just let's start there. Where are the Broncos at right now?
Yeah, I'd say in my imagination, it's kind of yes to all of the above. But it's interesting. You caught me at the right time. It's kind of raw, actually. I went on a bit of a Twitter rant the past couple days. If you've seen it,
I have
about the Broncos, and so it's perfect timing for this, and it's very applicable to the apropos for the name of this podcast as well, because I think Denver is a team in a rebuilding mode. And the fans. Elway's been reticent to say that word, and everybody's kind of been, the fans are wondering, like, when are we actually going to go into rebuilding mode, and when are we going to finally, hit that rebuild button? And I don't know. If you look at the reality of the NFL, like, teams don't hit the rebuild button and announce it and go through this whole process. Like, it just happens. Like, you get a quarterback, and all of a sudden your team turns around within one season, or you have a couple good drafts, or, it happens different for every team. And so I'd say Denver has been in a rebuild for the last 2 years. You look at what they've done to their offense. Emmanuel Sanders was the last starter on offense that played in that Super Bowl, the Super Bowl 50 team, and they've completely retooled their skill position players. I don't think other than Jeff Hireman, they don't have a skill position player on a second contract. Everybody's new young guys that are drafted by Denver or been brought over or undrafted, what have you. And so they've completely retooled that. They're still working to retool the offensive line, obviously, and, cycling through the quarterback position, but they've turned over the roster so much, and you have a brand new coaching staff, brand new schemes. What do you call that? That's a rebuild. There's nothing else. When people say we need to just finally hit the rebuild button, what else do you want them to do except for, conjure magically out of the air and bring a quarterback in here? Obviously the quarterback is the thing that Denver, they're a bad team right now because they don't have a quarterback, and they will be a bad team until they find a quarterback. And you can try to patch the holes with, semi-veteran guys like a Case Keenum or, bringing in Joe Flacco. But those guys were always understood to be placeholders with upside, or you hope they turn into something. But there was always kind of in the back of your mind, you knew they had to at some point find the guy, the long-term answer at quarterback, and it just hadn't happened yet. And I get that fans are upset at that, and that ultimately falls at the feet of John Elway because that's his job to find it. But it's also one of the hardest things in sports to do, finding that elusive franchise quarterback position. And it's, I get it's kind of frustrating because at times other teams make it look so easy. It's like, well, Gardner Minshew all of a sudden just steps up out of nowhere and starts playing well, and Kyle Allen steps in for Cam Newton and is playing well. And so I get Broncos fans' frustrations, but I think Denver really is in the middle of a rebuild, and I think maybe there's some misplaced expectations from fans this year. Like, to me, going into this year, it was a completely clean slate. You're starting with new schemes, you're starting with a new coaching staff, and you finally strung a couple drafts together with some young guys. You've got a nice young core. And so I think at this point, we're really only 7 games into if you want to call it the official rebuild, we're only 7 games into the official rebuild. And I think that's what John Elway, from a trending, that's the question about where they're trending. I think they're trending in the right direction in that they're wanting to build stability at the coaching staff, install schemes that can last and stay for several years, so you're not constantly rotating that out. They've had 4 offensive coordinators over the last 3-4 years, and The defense has turned over some too in terms of coaching staff. And so you want to build that stability, because when you do finally get your quarterback, you can't just wait till you get your quarterback and then hope to build stability around him. You've got to start now building that stability. And that's what Elway talked about during the offseason. And I don't know that a lot of fans were listening to that, or if they were, maybe it was in one ear and out the other, or they didn't want to believe it because he didn't say the word rebuilding, but he talked about wanting to build stability in the coaching staff and really build a player development. That's why he brought in Fangio and his staff, that teaching mindset, really build something, build a culture here, build a system in place that you can then bring in good players into, and you can plug in that quarterback once you do find him, because it is hard to find. And so you're going to be continually looking, but you want him to be able to hit the ground running. And the example I always give is, the Kansas City Chiefs had the talent around, they had Alex Smith, and everybody kind of knew that they weren't going to get there with Alex Smith. And so, they go aggressive and they trade up for Patrick Mahomes, but they had the coaching staff in place. They had continuity on offense. They had a lot of talent. And so they plugged him in and he hit the ground. They let him see her, obviously, but they plugged him in and he hit the ground running and, is what he is today. And so I've often said, if you took Patrick Mahomes and Denver happened to draft him in 2017, he for sure wouldn't have been a league MVP. And I don't know that he would have been the Patrick Mahomes that we see right now, because you can't unmarry the scheme and coaching staff from a young quarterback. And so I applaud John Elway for actually, recognizing that and wanting to put stability in a coaching staff in place so that when you do find your quarterback, you have that, good scheme and that solid coaching staff to marry him up with. That was a really long answer to your short question.
Oh, no, it was perfect, because I was thinking the same thing. Bronco fans, I hate to say this, but you've been a little bit spoiled. The Broncos have been, for now, I guess you would say 4 seasons, not looking that great. Looking kind of chaotic on some different things. But beyond that, the franchise has been one of the healthiest in the NFL. And I guess you could make that argument of, this is the expectation that's come. But every team has those times that are a little bit down. And I guess you just got to look at a lot of other franchises. Probably, 90% of other franchises around the NFL wish they were the Broncos. And, just looking at their history and what they've been doing for especially the last 30 years. And, you just have to look at the AFC West. The Broncos have won 3 Super Bowls before any of the others have won one here of recent. And so it's just, you got to keep things in perspective that it's not going to be perfect every single year. And it's going to take some time to sorry about that. But it's going to take some time to get this all figured out. And like you said, just to figure out the quarterback. The Browns had that running joke of how long of a list of names they could have at the quarterback position. The Broncos are at 4 or 5 right now. So, again, there's always a lot of unhealthier situations that have happened here in the NFL. And right now I feel like they are doing a pretty good job of like you said, building up that young talent. I know everybody says hit the rebuild. And to me, I think people look at the Dolphins and what they're doing. But to me, it's also it's great that they have all these draft picks, but they have absolutely zero talent on that team now. And so any rookies that come in, it's still going to be another 3-4 years before they're even going to know whether what they've done was a good decision or not. And so you still like to have at least some kind of foundation for when those rookies come in, that not everything is dropped on their plate and said, here you go, fix us. Even Tom Brady, when he was a young player, he didn't have to carry the Patriots. He had a great run game. He had a top 10 defense most of those first few years when he was in the NFL. And as he got better, they could rely on him to do a lot more. You're not having a Peyton Manning come in where he's day one your entire team. And so, again, that's just things that people have to kind of keep in perspective when you're looking at the Broncos and where they're at. They do have a lot of young talent that is showing really well. And I'm just going to have to see what they can do moving forward. But now let's talk about moving forward here. So let's talk a little bit about the Drew Lock situation. Where are you at on when the Broncos should be trying to get Drew Lock on the field?
I think for sure you want to get him on the field this season. If you go into next season and you don't have, and I'm not saying you need to have an answer in terms of the long-term guy at quarterback, but you need to have at least an answer in your mind of what you're going to do. Are you going to stay with Drew Lock and try to build around him, or do you need to start trading up because you've got some assets now with that Emmanuel Sanders trade, a third and a fourth, and so Denver has, I think it's like 7 picks in the top 4 rounds, and so you've got some ammo to go in and make a move at one of these young quarterbacks, and so I don't know that even if Locks plays a little bit and maybe shows a little bit that they still don't try and do that. You can't have too many good quarterbacks, and so I think there's still a situation where you could potentially chase a quarterback next year, even if Lock plays well. But you've got to at least see what you have in him at this point. If you think that Joe Flacco isn't going to be the guy and everything that he's shown for these last really 3 or 4 games, but throughout the whole season, that he's not going to be a guy that you hitch your wagon to for the next several years. He was always kind of going to be this placeholder. Maybe you get some upside. Maybe you get a little bit of a career revitalization. And I'm not saying that can't happen over the next couple games. Obviously, the Kansas City game kind of soured everybody on the Broncos offense and Joe Flacco. But really, it's been the last 3 games that he hasn't played well at all. The Denver offense has played horribly. And so I think the specific timing of it is going to depend on really, we're going to talk about the Colts here in a little bit, but it really depends on what happens, this Sunday and the next couple weeks, because if they go into the bye at 4-5, I don't think they're switching, at that point they'd be coming off of a 2-game win streak. I don't think they're switching quarterbacks at that point. And so I think it really depends on what happens these next couple games, where you'll see Drew Lock. But I think for sure you want to get him that back quarter of the season, potentially the back half. If they lose these next 2 games and continue to look the way they've looked, make the switch at the bye, because you've got to see what you have in him.
Yeah, I do worry a little bit of those 2 games coming out of the bye look vicious. You got at Minnesota, at Buffalo. So you got 2 of the best pass rushing teams in football with a very bad offensive line in front of Drew Lock on the road, noon start times. Is that really the healthiest time to put him on the field? I go back and forth on that because, you'd like to get as many games as you can, but kind of like Elway was talking about earlier today, you don't want to throw them into terrible situations either where you're just going to destroy them. And so it's hard to find that balance of when's going to be the right time. Like you said, these next 2 games could play a huge role of whether he even plays this year. There is some talk that the Broncos are kind of gauging the rest of the season off these next 2 and kind of seeing, okay, do we move forward with Drew Lock, or do we decide we're still going to make this playoff push and Drew Lock's going to stay on IR and we're going to bring back Riddick? So there's a lot that's playing into this, and that's why this game is such a big game. And so I guess moving beyond the Drew Lock conversation, you have a lot of people out there who are really pushing hard to trade Chris Harris. Are you in that camp right now, or is it still kind of a wait and see how the season's progressing, and still maybe just a little bit of you got to get your right compensation to make it worth the kind of trade?
Yeah, and I think the compensation is a big piece of it. If somebody's giving an offer that you can't refuse, it's hard to see Denver turning it down, but really, you only have another week before the trade deadline, and so you don't have a lot of time to kind of see how the season's going to play out. So I think at this point, he probably doesn't get traded, and I'm in agreement with that, mainly because, so with Emmanuel Sanders, obviously there was stuff kind of going around, rumored, and then it kind of came to fruition afterwards. And Von Miller even talked about it today of. There was some stuff going on in the locker room, and Emmanuel Sanders wasn't happy where he was at. And, I love Emmanuel Sanders, and really, who can blame him? He's on an offense, and he's been on an offense and been, toiling away on an offense with terrible quarterback play. So I don't blame him for wanting to, he's got a couple years left in his career, wanting to go win some games and really, live up to his full potential as a wide receiver that we've seen that he can do. And, I think he was being underutilized in the offense, not by design. It just is what it is. And so I don't fault Emmanuel Sanders for that. But to me, that's a different situation than Chris Harris. And so that potentially led Denver to wanting to try to get rid of him. And so I think when fans saw that, they maybe saw it as, oh, well, now it's the full tank is on. We're selling off all the assets, but I don't think that's necessarily the case. And I don't think it's the smart move specifically with Chris Harris, unless, to your point, unless it's a really good deal. But the other thing is, even if this season is kind of a total loss, or it's never going to be a total loss, because the point of it was to really get the coaching staff up and going. And this season was kind of you didn't have a quarterback in place. The coaching staff is new. It's establishing and it's building systems and all of that. So that's really what the season is about anyway. I don't know that anybody kind of went into the season expecting a playoff run or anything. So that would kind of be gravy at this point. You just hope to see progression from the coaching staff, some notification that the staff is what you thought they would be. Anyway, back to the Chris Harris piece. I think with Harris, you want to be able to evaluate the younger players on the team throughout the rest of this season. Even if you lose the next two games, you still want to utilize the game to evaluate these guys in this new system and have them learn it. And if you trade off Chris Harris as a corner, then you kind of throw your hands up on defense, because the amount of injuries they've sustained at the cornerback position, I mean, they would literally be pulling guys off the street to play, specifically at that position. And so I think the value of the position that he plays and how thin Denver is at the cornerback slot, even if you get a really good deal and you trade off Chris Harris, well, now you have a hard time evaluating even like a guy like Justin Simmons or Duke Dawson and Alexander Johnson and some of those younger guys on defense, because they have no cornerbacks. And so it makes it hard that when there's a glaring hole that you just rip the Band-Aid off and send him away for a pick. There's potentially some more ramifications down the line that you didn't have with Sanders necessarily. I think you can get by on the offense without Sanders. Not that they won't miss his talent for sure. He just doesn't leave that gaping hole that nobody else can step into, that on the defense. And so I think if you saw Isaac Yiadom playing or Devontae Bosby healthy and Isaac Yiadom playing well, then maybe potentially you can ship Chris Harris off and still have some learning taking place on the defensive side and growing. But at this point, if you ship Chris Harris out of town, you're not going to have any growing or learning on the defensive side. It's just going to be a train wreck. Right.
No, you're right. I mean, right now the Broncos are playing their number 5 cornerback is their number 2.
Yeah.
And when you're going to ask that guy to be your number 1 cornerback, I'm sorry, that's just going to end and just be downright terrible. And like you said, it's going to be a disservice to everybody else around you. So you're right. They just have to get a deal for Chris Harris that just blows them away, that they're just like, yeah, we can't pass on this. And the other side of it is, there's a good chance Chris Harris is going to get a decent contract after this season from another team. And so the Broncos are looking at a 3rd-round comp pick, possibly, or 4th. I mean, 3rd or 4th, it's going to be kind of tight in that area. But still, you got to get more value than that. So if a team comes with offering a 3rd and a 5th-round pick, well, you might as well keep the guy. To me, if it's not at least a mid-second or 1st-round pick, I'm not moving the guy. And I'm just trusting what I've got on the field and just saying, all right, let's just move forward and see what we got. So I'm with you on there. All right, so final question, then we'll get into the Colts game here. 2020 offseason, what are you doing to get this team back to competing for Super Bowls? Because you're going to be a team that probably has around, $85 million in cap space possibly, and quite a bit of draft capital. Where are you going with some things?
Yeah, I think the glaring hole has always been the quarterback position, and so you've got to make some progress there. And so I don't think the fan base, and I don't think it's good for the team to go one more year with let's plug in a guy and have him bridge to whoever, whatever we think the future is, and just continue to kick that can down the road. So I think you've got to start Drew Lock, or you've got to draft a guy and go big at the quarterback position. If you don't think that Drew Lock is ready to start and be that guy that you think you can build around and put him in the offense. Maybe he needs more time. Maybe he just doesn't show you enough throughout the off season or over these next couple of games if he's or the back half of the season if he's able to play any. I think you've got to go big at the quarterback position at that point then. And I don't know where Denver will land from a draft pick perspective, but you think maybe they'll have a top 10 pick, at least top 15 pick. But that may not be enough to get it done just organically. And it seems like the Broncos have been content to kind of let the quarterback position come to them if it happens in the draft. And I think that's been, I've got, several criticisms of Elway. I'm not just a staunch Elway defender, but that would be my largest criticism of Elway. And specifically in that 2018 draft, I think he missed an opportunity where the Jets traded up. I forget now who they traded up with. The Jets traded up to the second spot and gave up like 2 second-round picks and leapfrogged Denver essentially for the right to pick whoever the Browns didn't pick, either Sam Darnold or Baker Mayfield. And where it is from guys like Benjamin Albright and others that have some insider knowledge is that those were the two guys Denver was targeting, and so once they were gone, they were not forced to, but they ended up taking Bradley Chubb, which was an incredible pick, but I think you missed your opportunity there to potentially move up for pretty cheap from 5 to 2. So I don't think you can let one more offseason go by. So if I'm the GM in 2020, I can't let another offseason of a top 10 pick, a top 15 pick go by without at least, swinging for the fences at the quarterback position. Or I've got to be pretty darn sure that Drew Lock, he's got to light the world on fire over the next 4 games or the last 4 games of the season or something. To make me pass on a quarterback, which, is kind of tough because there's a lot of other holes. And every time I go into the draft, I'm like, man, there's all these different holes that we could fill if we didn't need a quarterback. But at some point, you've got to spend the draft capital, move up, and get a quarterback, because that's what we've seen teams that have their quarterbacks now. That's what they've had to do. And nobody cares. And I've said this several times. Nobody even remembers or cares what the Rams gave up to get Jared Goff. And you can, say what you want about Jared Goff and whether he's the final answer for them at quarterback, or Carson Wentz, or some of the other big move ups. It's really those two guys. Like their team gave up a haul to get them, but nobody cares because they're the quarterback of the future, and the team is fine now. They've recovered, and they found a way to plug the holes without that draft capital. And so I think sometimes fans put a little bit too much emphasis on the draft capital you have to give up to move up. But that quarterback position, if you can secure your guy and he pans out, it makes it worth, I think, any price that you would pay. And so I think Denver's got to go big there. So if I'm the GM in 2020, that's what I'm looking at for sure. But then too, the next thing is, it's kind of it's been this constant story in Denver has been the quarterback position and really the tackle position. They've had just a turnstile at tackle for the last several years, both at right and left tackle. Since they drafted Garrett, or before they drafted Garrett Bowles, they didn't have an answer at the left tackle position. And I don't think that Garrett's the guy moving forward. And so I think you've got to take advantage of this tackle class coming out. It looks like it'll be pretty good, and I think you've got to go big there. If you don't go quarterback, you've got to try to get one of those top tackles, and maybe even come away with a quarterback and a tackle if you get one in the second round or something. But they've got to address that position. And so if you think maybe Juwan James comes back healthy, and then you draft your left tackle of the future and can let Garrett Bowles go and maybe solidify that offensive line. But those are the biggest holes, obviously the glaring ones that I see that you've got to get fixed that have been just constant, leaky faucets for Denver for the last several years. And so you've got to go big to really shore those up. And then you see what happens from there. Obviously cornerback's a need. You go down the list. There's a ton of needs.
Right.
So you've got to, and so maybe, that's where you spend your money in free agency is, shoring up some of these other needs. I think they've got to bring a corner in, potentially, if they can get Bryce Callahan healthy, obviously that helps. And I've been following Kelechi Osimile's kind of his crazy story with the Jets. They've kind of mishandled some of his health problems, and really it's been a really crazy situation. But I'm like, man, come over to Denver. We'll pay you. We will treat you good. We could use another guard. And so, maybe you lure some really good players potentially to shore up some of the offensive line spots outside tackle. It's hard to find a tackle, but maybe you could get a guard or a center or something in free agency to shore some of that up. So I think some of the other positions are not as much of a priority in terms of the draft. I think you've got to prioritize quarterback and tackle, and then maybe corner after that. Even though corners will be a glaring need after Chris Harris, I think the other two are more long-term, impact positions.
I like it. I like your thoughts there, man. Do you have a favorite quarterback for the 2020 class?
I haven't really dug into him a ton. I mean, I've been following it and stuff.
I just didn't know if your boy Jalen Hurts.
I am. Yeah, I'm an Oklahoma fan. I hope Jalen Hurts gets another Heisman. I was actually gets another Heisman for Oklahoma. 3 in a row. But I've been pleasantly surprised by him. I was, not on the Jalen Hurts train, and this is, I was one of the guys that was early on, pounding the table for Baker Mayfield, and I got, you always have those picks that you really miss on, and I've missed on my fair share of them. But Baker Mayfield was one that, I pounded the table for. People said, he's not even a first-round pick, and then, lo and behold, he goes number 1 overall. And I said the same about Kyler Murray. He had a little bit more question marks from Baker Mayfield, and I don't know that I would have taken him number 1 overall, but I liked him coming out. But Jalen Hurts is a guy that I was pleasantly surprised this year with how good he's looked, and so it's a pretty stacked quarterback class for these guys coming out. I'm not as much of a Tua fan. If you could get Jalen Hurts in the second, or early mid first, he'll go in the first after this season. Now that I say that, but if you can get him outside of the top maybe 2 quarterbacks, I wouldn't mind it. I think he could potentially turn into something in the NFL. I haven't been super impressed with Justin Herbert from what I've seen, but that's an option, and Denver reportedly kind of likes him. I'm not as aboard the Tua train as others, and then there's some other interesting guys too that have looked pretty good, and so I think it could be a pretty stacked quarterback class. But I'll be interested to dig into it kind of once the season starts to wind down, or if we lose the next couple games, we may be digging into quarterbacks a little earlier than we expected or potentially hoped.
Right. You didn't even mention my top guy, Joe Burrow of LSU.
Oh yeah, I completely blanked on him. He's been such a surprise.
Yeah,
he's super impressed with him.
He actually reminds me a lot of Mayfield. That's my comparison.
That's interesting. I haven't heard that one before.
Okay.
I'll have to. That's really good.
There's just a lot of things that he does. I mean, he's kind of a fired up guy. He's athletic, but it's not like it's obviously not Lamar Jackson athletic. I mean, Baker Mayfield, he did enough with his feet, but it was more just to buy him extra time to allow guys to get open, move in the pocket, those kind of things. Burrow does a great job keeping his eyes down the field, looking for the pass, just like Mayfield did. Has a good enough arm, not absolutely outstanding arm like a Mahomes or a Locke, obviously. Seems pretty smart with the football, doesn't turn it over like crazy, can make tight window throws. He isn't quite as pinpoint accurate as what I remember at Mayfield, but he also hasn't had as many starts as Mayfield. So that's where the match starts breaking down a little bit between the two. But that's kind of what I see in him, and it's why I've been a lot more excited, because I was on the Mayfield train, especially after the Senior Bowl, just getting to see him live and just see that man operate. That was something special to watch for sure. But all right, well, we're needing to get to this Colts game because it is actually a pretty important game for both teams here. So let's take a quick break, and then we're going to be right back to talk about this upcoming game.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
All right, and we are back. I am Carl, and I'm joined by Jeff Essary of Mile High Report today, and very, very excited to have him on. Loved all your thoughts there on where the team's at and where they're going. But let's just focus in now on this upcoming Sunday and this upcoming Colts team, who are actually winning their division, even though their starting quarterback retired. about a week before the season started.
That's crazy.
And here they are. And honestly, it's kind of one of those weird things. Like, they're not like this outstanding team. You look at their stats, and they're pretty much in the middle of the road on every stat. I mean, 22nd in yards per game, 15th in points per game, turnover differentials at +1, 13th in yards given up per game, 17th in yards or in points given up per game. And so again, they're just right there hovering at the middle of where things are at. It's kind of an interesting team and how they find ways to win games, and they've won against some pretty darn good teams. I mean, that win against the Chiefs where nobody gave them a chance, when the Chiefs are just smoking everybody, and all of a sudden Colts win in a, what was it, 19-13 game?
Yeah.
And then this last weekend, they play the Houston Texans, who are, again, riding high, just having beaten the Chiefs and looking like one of the top contenders in football. And lo and behold, Colts find a way to win the game and are now winning their division. And so this is one of those games, I'm just not sure who this Colts team is. Are they actually truly a division contending team? And one that can take on some of these high-powered teams like the Chiefs or the Texans. I don't think they're quite there with, obviously, the Patriots. Nobody really is. But I don't know. I'm interested to hear some of your thoughts on how you would attack this team. And so I'll start off, though, just because just kind of give you a showing of how we do this a little bit and some of what we talk about when we're going through this. But I have the Broncos offense against the Colts defense and trying to figure out how to score more than 6 points in a game.
Good luck.
Yeah, I know. And it still does come down to, I mean, yeah, I think, who was it? Is it Joe Rolls for you guys? Is that how you say his name?
Yeah.
He did a lot of different screenshots just showing how many guys were running wide open. And
oh, yeah, absolutely. It's crazy.
The opportunities that were there.
I don't want to cut you off, but there was a stat that came out. I don't know if you saw it come through on Twitter today. Gosh, I forget who tweeted it out, but essentially Next Gen Stats has tracked like the number of open receivers at the time of throw, and Joe Flacco's last in the league with 21, either 21 missed receivers or 21 throws where there were missed receivers throughout the season. He's tied for last with Jameis Winston currently, was just another, kind of to your point, exactly.
Yeah, I think I saw something about that. The average distance of his receivers being open is over 3 yards. And so just again showing the guys have been open, and it's just not been there. I don't know what, if Flacco's seeing ghosts, as Sam Darnold likes to put it. The stat you're talking about was 21 pass attempts with 2 or more open wide receivers.
Yeah, that's it. There you go.
That he missed. And so, again, it's. I think there's such a combination of things going on with why this offense is struggling. I mean, I guess we can get into this conversation a little bit here. And I do think that Scangarello has had his moments where he hasn't been a great play caller. There are those times where they are marching down the field, things are just clicking, looking great, they get to the red zone, and then all of a sudden they completely change what they're doing. And you're kind of going, what just happened here? Why would you go away from the very thing that's working? Make them stop that before you change. And so there are some of those. He likes to get cued every once in a while. There's times where he just makes changes just to make changes. But then you have the other side of it, that's what the stat alludes to, is that some of it is just the execution of the players. The play's there, and they're just missing it. I mean, that Chiefs defense was not great, and there were opportunities. But yes, the offensive line was downright terrible. I mean, there's not much you can do play call-wise when your offensive tackles pretty much just decided that they didn't want to show up for a game. There's only so much you can do. You become very, very limited as a play caller at that point. So, again, it's kind of a mixture of what's going on and why the offense is struggling. But let me give my background here of just what I think the Broncos should do to get things a little bit back on track. And this is a little bit of just understanding, I guess, who the Colts are, where their strengths are. That honestly, on their defense, they don't have all that many weaknesses. I mean, they have a lot of new pieces. They have a lot of young players, but in reality, they are actually pretty darn strong across the board. I mean, there's nothing that sticks out and says this team is awesome at this place. I mean, their defensive line is pretty good. I will give them that. Their edge rushers are actually pretty good. They're getting up there in age. Justin Houston, I mean, I think Bronco fans know him pretty well. You got Jabal Sheard on the other side, another guy that has played pretty well. Came over from New England and has been a pretty good player for them. But beyond that, I mean, the rest of the defense, I mean, you got Darius Leonard, who is a good player. I will give you that. But the rest of them, it's pretty much they're good, not great players. And so the way that you beat them, the teams that have actually had success against them, are the ones that are willing to be disciplined in what they do back. And what I mean by that is they're willing to take what the defense gives them. The Colts are not going to get beat deep a whole lot. They're not going to make a whole lot of mistakes in communication, all those kind of things, because they've been coached up really well. I'm very impressed really when I watch them. Yeah. And so again, you got to take what you can get. That's why the Chiefs struggled, because Mahomes is so used to plays breaking down, teams making mistakes, and being able to hit the deep ball. And those just weren't there. And then his offensive line wasn't holding up, and he didn't have the ability to escape the pocket with that ankle. And so it was just kind of everything, perfect storm coming down on the Chiefs at that time. And so for the Broncos, again, this is something that they've struggled with, to be disciplined and consistent. Not exactly what they're known for right now on offense, but it is what they need to do. They need to have where Joe Flacco, take what the defense gives you, get it out of your hands quick, let your playmakers go try to make a play. You don't have to go hit the big play every time. And so, I mean, they will give a lot of the underneath stuff. They're going to want to make you march down the entire field. You can run on them a little bit. I mean, they're pretty good against the run. They're pretty good against the pass, but you can do a little bit of both on them. And then every once in a while, just mix in some kind of misdirection play. I mean, we're at that point in the season. You're 2-5. You're going to have to take a few chances. You are. And just try to get some kind of spark. The Raiders were a team that had a lot of success against them. They had this one play for 60 yards on a rushing touchdown where they ran a fake run to the right with their speed wide receiver coming back to the left, handed off to him wide open for a touchdown. And so, I mean, those are plays that you could do with Phillip Lindsay, you could do with Deontay Spencer, whoever you want to put out there, but have some misdirection plays every once in a while. But otherwise, you're going to have to really, like I said, you're going to have to play small ball or the short game, whatever you want to call it. I'm a golfer, and the old saying was driving's for show, putting's for dough. And everybody wants to learn how to hit the driver. But if you actually want to be good at golf, you'd be better spending all your time learning how to putt. Putt golf can actually be a good thing for you. But no, I mean, it is. You have to learn sometimes. The short game can be a good thing for you. And then otherwise, again, just have a few different plays mixed in. Look for your opportunities. I do think that this could be one of those games where you hope Noah Fant can bounce back after such a terrible game, because they do struggle sometimes with their coverage of tight ends. Again, I mean, I like to go to the games, and if I'm attacking a team, I want to see how a team attacks successfully. And the Raiders, unfortunately, were the team that attacked this Colts defense the best. And so what they did, they had a lot of their tight ends over the middle, making big plays, making those catches for the 6-7 yards at a time. And so, again, Noah Fant has to step up in this kind of game. You have to have Hamilton. He's now the number 2 wide receiver, but I'm sure he's going to still play some slot receiver every once in a while. This is another game where he's got to step up and have a big game. But otherwise, it's still going to be a low-scoring game, I'll be honest. I mean, it's just kind of how both of these teams have to play, and it's going to be who makes the fewer mistakes, I think, in the end, of who can actually win this game, because there's not going to be a ton of really, really big plays. But I'll switch it to you now. How would you have the Broncos defense defend against this Colts offense?
Yeah, and just to tag on before I jump in there, to tag on to a couple things you're saying, totally agree with you. And I think to your point about the mistakes, it's really going to come down to who's going to make the most mistakes, because that's what we saw in the Chiefs game versus Denver. Was what really kind of set that game wide open, was that strip sack to Flacco. I think it was like 13-6 before that, and then that just kind of the downward spiral right after that. And the Colts lost to the Raiders that you mentioned. They turned the ball over twice, which was their highest turnover mark for the game or for the season. They turned it over twice again against the Titans as well. That was the only two games they've had two turnovers, and the big piece of why they lost that game to the Raiders. And so I do totally agree with you. It's going to come down to who makes the mistakes and who's able to limit those mistakes and the big plays for the other team. And it'll be interesting to see Denver. You mentioned, you look at the struggles Denver's had converting third down on offense, and a lot of it is, I think, Joe Flacco doesn't have another guy to step up really. Cortland Sutton has been that guy on third down. And there really hadn't been anybody else on the successful third downs. It's been Cortland Sutton, and when he's covered, there isn't anybody else to really step up. Emmanuel Sanders was kind of that guy, and now he's gone. And so, I totally agree. Deshaun Hamilton and Noah Fant, they've really got to do, take on some extra work, and Fant's got to shrug off that tough game on Thursday night and come ready to play, because they're going to need him for sure. Digging in to the sorry, I didn't mean to take the offensive side. It totally resonated with what you were saying there. I think on the defensive side, Denver's defense against the Colts offense, the Broncos defense is really, with all the injuries and Bradley Chubb being out and all the cornerbacks going down, they've really, to me, kind of hit their stride over the last couple of weeks, even though, they didn't play the best game against the Chiefs, but up until the game kind of broke wide open. And they gave it that one big play that Chris Harris got beat on deep with Tyreek Hill. But they've played pretty solid defense. Obviously they were coming off that Tennessee Titans shutout. And I've always held that this defense was, just needing to finally get in a bit of a groove and weren't as bad as they looked on paper, or that people were saying, especially after that Jacksonville game. And they really kind of turned the defense around after that game. And so I do think they've got a really good shot to slow down some of this Colts offense, because while it's to me, when I watch them on tape, and I watched the Texans game just recently, they're extremely well coached offense. It's extremely well coached, just team in general. Totally agree. On the defensive side, what Matt, let me make sure I'm pronouncing his name correctly, Eberflus, has done on the defensive side has really turned them around. And man, Frank Reich didn't miss a beat when Andrew Luck went down or retired, and Jacoby Brissett had to step in, and Jacoby Brissett's really been impressing me and has played really well this season. But he's getting a lot of help as well from his offensive line, and that's not a bad thing. That's not a knock on him. I mean, it's great for a young quarterback and a guy that doesn't have as much experience to be able to get in there in a really well-coached team, really well-schemed offense, behind a really good offensive line. And so if you look at some of his next-gen stats for time to throw, is one of the higher times to throw in the league. Let me make sure I get the exact numbers pulled up. Yeah, he's like top 10 with 2.8 seconds for his time to throw. But that hasn't been a bad thing. He's actually, leveraged that in a lot of the tape that I was watching against the Texans. He's just sitting back there all day to survey the field with the stuff that Frank Reich is drawing up for him. And so I think he's getting a lot of really good help from his coaching staff and from that offensive line. And so Denver's got to be able to put some pressure on him, and then also, not let him escape from the pocket on that, but they've got to make him uncomfortable, whether that's bringing some extra pressure, or, just Malik Reed and Von Miller stepping up and really kind of getting in his face. And that's, that's the case with every quarterback, obviously. But I think that's going to be Denver's biggest challenge, is getting Jacoby Brissett off his game, because that's really, they got into a rhythm early against the Texans and, racked up a couple touchdowns and then kind of coasted for the rest of the game. And Brissett's playing really well behind that offensive line. So I think Denver's got to get some pressure in his face to kind of disrupt him, because he hasn't been, I want to make sure I'm giving him, the due credit, but he hasn't been incredible. He's been, his air yards to the sticks has actually been pretty low. He's like top 5, in his average throw behind the sticks. And so he's kind of taking what the defense is giving him. He's, throwing it short, and he's utilizing a lot of the, outside of T.Y. Hilton, they're targeting the running backs and the tight ends a lot. And he's shown a good connection with Eric Ebron. He's not turning the ball over. He's only got 3 interceptions on the season. And so I think it really hinges to me, and they haven't had a super strong running game from what I've seen on tape. They kind of they lean on it when they need to, but I think, obviously Jacoby Brissett's going to be the key to stopping this Colts offense, is really getting him off his game and making him uncomfortable. And he just never really looked uncomfortable against the Texans. And, that's why they ended up winning the game.
Yeah, I like it. I think people overemphasize how good their running game was because of that Chiefs game and just how the run game took over. But it really was the Chiefs' defense was just downright terrible in that game. And of course, that offensive line was just moving people. There's probably not a more known offensive lineman in football right now than what the Colts have there.
Yeah, with Quentin Nelson.
Nelson.
He's been a monster.
Yeah, he's fun to watch. And I know there were some Bronco fans that are a little upset maybe that the Broncos didn't take him in the draft and instead took Bradley Chubb. I still think Bradley Chubb was the right choice, and I think that's still going to prove out in the long run. But still, when you look at Quentin Nelson and what he brings to the table, and it goes way beyond him. Their entire offensive line is something to behold. They really do clear across the board. They've it's so funny to see where they are now compared to when Andrew Luck was the man. And just how they really ruined his career, but then all of a sudden they finally get a good offensive line and his body breaks down. But Braden Smith there, right tackle, has been really good for him. Ryan Kelly, another first-round pick that they use on the offensive line. I think Anthony Costanzo has graded out as one of the top tackles in football, if I remember right. And so, again, across the board, they've just been really, really strong there. But so it is going to be tough to get pressure on him. But I do think he sometimes can hold on to the ball a little bit longer than he should. And so there will be some opportunities. And he does – I keep saying he's got to learn to get beyond just having a fastball.
Yeah.
I think he sometimes really struggles with that, having the touch, and so he'll try to rocket it in. And so there's been some opportunities for some interceptions that teams have missed because – well, one, he's just throwing so hard, and defenders are not used to trying to catch a pass that's coming at them that hard. But beyond that, so there will be some opportunities. But you're right. You got to get some pressure in his face. You got to make him uncomfortable back there and see what you can do. You're going to have to take some chances, I think. Again, I really think the Broncos are at that point. You're just going to have to take some risk. You're going to have to bring some zero coverage blitzes. And just hope that your guys are going to get home and that your secondary guys are going to hold up. And I know with having your fifth string cornerback on the field, that's not exactly a great place to be, but it's kind of where things are at for the Broncos. But all right, well, I want to get to one final segment here before we get out of here. But let's take a quick break and then we'll close out this podcast.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
All right, and welcome back to Building the Broncos. I'm your host, Carl, and of course, joining me today is Jeff from Mile High Report, and very, very excited just to have you on here, man, and loved all of your insights so far. And so I want to get to this final segment, and we're kind of just getting to the what-if part of the game, And then I want to get your prediction for the game of how the Broncos are going to do here on the road heading to Indy. But let's start with this. Broncos win if fill in the blank.
Yeah, I think that they win if the offense shakes off the whatever it was that was plaguing them on Thursday, and really what's been plaguing them the last 3 weeks, and they've got to come up and step up and take care of business. The offense can't continue to convert at 15% on third downs and expect to win games, and so they've really got to step up if Denver's really going to win this game.
I would say the Broncos win this game if they can keep it to 3 sacks or less. Let me ask you this question, just because I know this is getting a little bit off topic of what we're talking about. How much of a difference does the return of Juwan James make for this offensive line?
I think it's huge if he's healthy. I know Fangio's talked about him potentially being on a pitch count. But yeah, if you're able to get him back, and we didn't get to see a ton of him in the preseason, and again, really just a handful of snaps against the Raiders game, but I think he, definitely solidifies that offensive line a little bit, at least at one tackle position, and then you can, kind of chip and help with Garrett Bowles. But like to your point, you were saying earlier, when you've got both tackles really struggling, there's not much an offensive coordinator can do, and so I think it gives them a lot more flexibility if James is able to stay healthy, and so come back in football shape and play like we would expect him to play. And so I expect him to still be on a pitch count, but while he's in there, I think it's a huge difference for Denver.
Right. Well, I mean, he can't play much worse than what Wilkinson's shown so far.
Exactly.
But, all right, now to the next one. Broncos lose if...
I think if it's more of the same. My biggest criticism against the Chiefs was not even necessarily the very specifics of the game of what they didn't do or whatever, but just how they approached the game. They came out flat. They didn't recognize the moment, it felt like. I know everybody preaches, next game, or you just focus on this game and don't look ahead or look at the records or anything like that. But this game is just as important as last week's was, in that it's a top AFC opponent. And if you're going to make anything out of this season and try to make a wild card run, like, this is your chance. You need to win on the road against a top AFC opponent, and this is the time that you step up and do that. If you're gonna try to shake off the losing culture of these last several years, and they just didn't respond against the Chiefs, and so I think Denver loses if they continue to do that and just come out flat. Yeah,
can't disagree, man. All right, well, I'm gonna say, if there isn't a second weapon that steps up beyond Courtland Sutton.
Yeah, that's good. I
mean, teams are going to be obviously focused on him and saying anybody else beat us but this guy. And, that's always the problem of losing Sanders. We saw it last year when Sanders went down, how the offense just absolutely just tanked. I mean, they weren't great before that, but they were absolutely abysmal once he went down.
Yeah, and it'll be a great test for Rich Scangarello too, because like to your point, what we saw last year was not only did the offense suffer, but really from a coordinator perspective, they weren't able to scheme their way out of it and get other guys open. And I think that'll be the biggest challenge for Rich Scangarello, is how can he either scheme around to get Courtland Sutton open, which he's shown a good ability to do that so far this season, and you've got, like you said, you've got to have guys stepping up.
All right, MVP if the Broncos win.
I'm going to go Joe Flacco. I think he has to be the MVP if Denver wins, or maybe it's Juwan James. If he goes back and the line is solidified. But I think Joe Flacco has to step up and play much better than he did on Thursday night if they're going to win this game.
I'm going to go Deshaun Hamilton. Just again, going back to that second weapon. I think that he has a real chance to have a big game. I do think that part of his bad season, some of it's been him. He's had drops. But it's also been that he's been missed when he is open. This was a problem last year. I did a film article on this, of how often Deshaun Hamilton is wide open, and Keenum just wouldn't even look at him.
Yeah, I remember that article. That was good.
And I had a lot of people just kept going back to the stats like, well, he's not doing anything on the field. I'm like, yes, he is. A wide receiver is very dependent upon a quarterback to do something. I mean, you can't throw it to yourself. as Tom Brady's wife was so eloquently quoted. And so, again, I think this is a good opportunity for him to really show that I still haven't given up on him. I loved that pick when the Broncos made it. I kept saying I loved it more than the Courtland Sutton pick. And I guess I'm just being stubborn that this is going to be the guy that still steps up and does something for the Broncos. But
yeah, I agree. I think, and we saw him at the Senior Bowl there in Mobile, and he looked great when we saw him down there. And he's, you listen to him, and he's a really mature guy. It sounds like he's a really hard worker, and gets in the film room. And so I think, to your point, it's getting that opportunity. And so hopefully over this next, now that he's got that opportunity, he really has to step up. Hopefully we see him enter the call.
All right. Well, who's the GOAT if they lose?
I feel like I'm just piling on at this point on Garrett Bowles, but I feel like, he felt like he shorted up a little bit for a week or two, and then it kind of busted wide open again against the Chiefs. And so I think if we, continuing on the trend of if we see more of the same from Denver, it's going to be, the tackle position, and Garrett Bowles specifically really tanking the offense and not allowing them to do anything.
Well, I'm going to actually switch it over to the other side of the ball and say Shelby Harris. He's going to have obviously, I think, the toughest matchup of the game going against Quentin Nelson. And it's not that I don't think he's going to get beat, but if he gets absolutely destroyed throughout the game and they can just run behind him and just, pretty much run down the clock and wear down this defense, keep the offense on the sideline, keep them out of rhythm, all those kind of things. I think Shelby Harris will be key, that he can't completely get destroyed out there. I don't expect a great game, but if he has an average game, I think the defense can do some decent things out there.
Yeah, great point. I think he'll be a key on that defensive line. Like you said, that's probably the toughest matchup of the game. Well, that would be a great one to watch.
All right, well, let's do final score here. What do you have? Who do you have winning? What's the final score for the game?
Man, I'm terrible at score predictions.
I am too. I nailed it once last year. I think week 2, I was right on the money. And then I had people asking me about it, and I was like, you really don't want to ask me.
Just set yourself up for disappointment.
Yes, pretty much, yeah.
I'm going to go, as much as my heart wants to say Denver comes in and wins this game, I think they lose. I'm going to go 24-13.
I was going to go 23-13. Broncos lose. So we're both right there at 1 point off. It is being on the road. I know they've had 10 days to get ready for this one. Coming off a bad loss, you like to think your team's a little bit fired up to get out there, but I just think that they're missing the pieces right now. And obviously Joe Flacco's showing he's just not feeling it. He's not comfortable for this team, and I just don't see the offense getting back on track against this Colts team, who are they're an above average team, and right now the Broncos unfortunately are a below average team.
Yeah, totally agree. That's really well said on the above average and below average. And, the Colts they're a little further along in their rebuilding journey, I would say, too. They're a really well-coached team, and I'm not saying Denver isn't a well-coached team right now, but, they kind of are at this point. I think the coaching staff is still trying to catch their stride, but the Colts are kind of what Denver would hope to be in a year or two in terms of, the new regime taking over, and what Ballard and Frank Reich have done with that team is something that Denver is, you got to be hopeful for in the next year or two.
Exactly. All right. Well, I want to just say thank you for coming on, man. Really loved hearing what you had to say. Again, just getting to catch back up with you. And so, again, just appreciate you coming on. You working on anything that you want to put out there to our readers that they need to be checking out?
Yeah. First of all, Ben, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. Respect the heck out of you and what you guys do. And so thanks for all the great Broncos content that you guys continue to crank out. And I'm honored to be a part of it and jump on here for Nick. And, we'll definitely stay in touch and maybe have to do this again or just, collab on something else. This was fun. I appreciate it. But yeah, and kind of in the spirit of collabs, Joe Rolls and Joe Mahoney over at, I hope I'm saying his last name right, over at Mile High Report. We're kind of trying something new in terms of breaking down film together. And so we got a couple pieces coming out that we all co-authored where we kind of all give our thoughts on a couple different pieces, almost like we're sitting around, watching film together. And so we put the clips out there and all comment on them and talk about what we see in those games. And so that'll be coming out, I think, on it was sometime this weekend, either Friday or Saturday. There'll be a couple pieces coming out there. And so we're excited about it. And I think it'll be a lot of fun for folks. Hopefully they enjoy it.
I'm looking forward to it, man. And I just wanted to point out one last thing here. But before we get out of here, you talked about just the Colts and their rebuild. They started out last year 1-5.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that.
And they had Andrew Luck as their quarterback. So remember, they were further along just having that quarterback there. And so obviously they got things turned around real quick because they made the playoffs and even won a playoff game against Houston. But no, so just keep things in perspective, everybody out there. Let's make sure we understand just it's a process. It is. And it's not always year to year. Sometimes it's a 3-year build. But I appreciate you being on here, man. And so that's going to wrap up today's episode of Building the Broncos, powered by Overtime Media. You can find me on Twitter at Carl Dumler MHH, and of course Jeff at Jeffrey Essary. And make sure you head on over to milehighhuddle.com, an affiliate of the Maven Coalition and Sports Illustrated. Head on over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating and comment. Your support can help us continue to bring you our Denver Bronco deep dives. You can follow the Building the Broncos podcast and all our other great audio content by subscribing to the Huddle Up podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. And you can follow us on Twitter at Mile High Huddle and, of course, at BTB Football Pod. For Jeff, I'm Carl, wrapping up another episode of the Building the Broncos podcast. We hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you soon. As Nick always says to close out the podcast, go Broncos.